I think next match also we need to put up a big show.
The Massey Women's Caribbean Premier League will continue tomorrow right here at the Queen's Park Oval with Trinbago Knight Riders versus the Barbados Royals, who are unbeaten in their 3 games so far, and they're already through to Sunday's final. Then the competition continues on Saturday with the Ghana Amazon Warriors coming up against the Trinbago Knight Riders. That's at the Brian Lara Cricket Academy, and of course there is a final on Sunday at the same venue. Reporting for Newsroom from the Queen's Park Oval in Trinidad, I'm Avinash Ramzan.
That's news on PBCJ. You can follow us on our social media platforms at PBC Jamaica. Thanks for watching.
The world needs smart, clean, and sustainable energy solutions for a better tomorrow. Solutions that protect the environment, lower our carbon footprint, and allow our regions to achieve sustainable economic growth. This means that the global economy must move away from fossil fuel to renewables like solar and wind in order to meet our 2050 carbon emission goals. Doing so presents loads of opportunities for us in the Caribbean, including highly skilled, well-paying jobs, and increased sustainability and resilience in our economies. Preparing for the shift will require innovation, large technological investments, new policies and infrastructure, regional collaboration, and global cooperation. It also requires fairness and inclusion. One example being providing affordable electricity for all.
Panelists Naika Praskett, Program Officer of SIDS Partnerships at the International Renewable Energy Agency, Raquel Moses, CEO, Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator,
Dr. Gary Jackson, Executive Director, Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency,
and Ricardo Marshall, Director, Roofs to Reefs Program within the Prime Minister of Barbados' office. All will examine the energy transition, exploring its definition, requirements, responsibilities of our leaders, and the risks and challenges associated with the transition.
I am Tony Thorne, and on behalf of our host, the Central Bank of Barbados, I would like to welcome all viewing on television and online tonight to this edition of the Caribbean Economic Forum, entitled, What Does Moving to Green Energy Mean for Us? Our focus tonight is to examine the global push to net zero greenhouse carbon emissions by 2050. And what does all of this mean for Caribbean citizens and for the Caribbean region on a whole? And most importantly, what are we doing to ensure we reach our targets?
Joining us, my name again is Tony Thorne, and this is the latest edition of the Caribbean Economic Forum. The Caribbean Economic Forum is an educational and outreach initiative by the Central Bank of Barbados with the goal of decreasing the financial gaps and increasing financial inclusion within the region. Good night to our panelists. Good night, panelists. How are you?
Well, thank you.
Let's dive right in, because we do not have a lot of time. So my first question for you is, what is green energy and what does the energy transition entail? I'll start with Raquel.
So green energy is any energy that is manufactured from a renewable source. So it could mean things like solar, which people are really familiar with, wind, could mean things like waste to energy. It can also mean things like hydro and geothermal. And so most people wouldn't know that that hydro is probably the most popular source of renewable energy being used globally. But what it could mean for us is a complete change in the way our economies function, not just on the domestic production of energy, but also on the ability that it could create for us for exporting energy in various forms.
Thank you so much, Raquel. I'll go to the next panelist, Dr. Gary.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for having me. So as Raquel said, energy generated from natural resources, wind, solar, the heat under the earth, which is geothermal. I think one of the things that we have to consider in the transition is that we need to trust each other. Trust is something that we have to consider very, very carefully, and taking stock of what we have. And it will require reconfiguration of our systems. It's not business as usual. So that is very critical, reconfiguration, and I will go into that later in our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Annika?
Well, thank you for the invitation. Gary and Raquel covered the definition of green energy, so I wouldn't touch on that. But it definitely requires a whole of society approach, buy-in from every level of stakeholder. And as Gary just mentioned, reconfiguration, and we must remember that reconfiguration also takes time and trust. Thank you.
Ricardo?
Hi, good night all. The only thing I can really add to what was said so far is that we need to ensure that we're talking about utilizing natural resources at a rate so that they're replenished faster than they're consumed. And we need to ensure that as we use those renewable energies, we have a balance in there where we have intermittent and firm power. And of course, we need to take the entire society forward as we move. So we must have that just transition and the inclusion of everybody as we go forward.
My next question, what are your organizations doing to assist and champion the green energy transition? I'm going to start with you, Ricardo.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. The Roofs to Reefs program is under the Prime Minister's office in Barbados, and we are responsible for operationalizing the national development in a climate resilient and sustainable manner. And for us, green energy is a key component in building that resilience, not just in the energy sector, but also related to key sectors, including water resources management, waste management, housing development, and overall community and national resilience.
Thank you. Annika?
Well, briefly, the International Renewable Energy Agency's mandate is that of an international thought leadership institution. And the SIDS Lighthouses Initiative is a cooperative framework which focuses on advancing the energy transition in global SIDS. So not only on one end do we produce knowledge assets, but on the ground we place high value on the delivery of technical assistance, as well as mobilizing partnerships to fill whatever gaps there may be on the ground. So for example, in May of this year in Barbados, we held a cooperation in finance and investment conference, and we partnered with CCSA, CCRI, and the government of Barbados on this, and it looks at exploring opportunities to bridge the financing gap in the Caribbean. Apart from this, we also do training and capacity building, etc.
Thank you, Annika. Gary?
Thanks again. So we are the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, a CARICOM institution established by the heads of government back in 2018. Our mandate is really to accelerate the implementation of sustainable energy across the region, both public and private sector. And I just want to highlight, we have several programs, about 7 strategic programs, so you can visit us on our website, www.ccree.org. But I want to focus on one, which is the Integrated Resource and Resilience Plan. And that plan is what we call an electricity expansion plan, but it takes into consideration load growth. It takes into consideration supply options that we need to consider to build greater resilience and sustainability in our countries. And that will consider all options that the countries may see fit for their jurisdiction. It also considers demand side management, but we recognize that energy efficiency and energy conservation is going to be critical for us to match supply with demand so that we can have greater resilience in our systems as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Raquel?
Yes, so at the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator, we are focused on helping the region to transition, working in collaboration with the public and the private sector. So we have a number of different programs. We chair the Regional Single Energy Export Working Group, which is a group focused on how do we work together to be a net energy exporter. We're working with the government of Trinidad and Tobago on the solar assembly project, finding an investor to establish a solar assembly facility in the Caribbean. We also have been working with the Caribbean Development Bank and a number of other partners on the Caribbean Blended Finance for Resilience, which is a fund that will help to lower the cost of developing energy projects, specifically mostly around solar, but also looking at some other projects. We bring investors to the region. We have quarterly investor forums and feature projects from the region that are looking for money. We work with philanthropy. So anything that helps to close the gap between where we are and where we need to be from an energy standpoint. We work across other sectors as well. But in the energy sphere, it is bringing money to the region to help close the gap between our ambition and our actual reality on the ground.
Thank you. Annika, you spoke earlier about small island developing states, and that's your expertise. And we have millions of people from small island developing states watching tonight, and they're going to want to know what are the challenges that small island developing states face. Can you paint a picture for those of us who are not experts in the field?
All right, thanks, Tony. It may seem like a mouthful, but we're still prevailing despite it all. So if we step back and look at it globally, keep in mind there are small island developing states, or SIDS, outside of the Caribbean region. So there are SIDS in the Pacific and the African and Indian Ocean. So structurally and on the face of it, our challenges may be the same in terms of our smallness, isolation, reliability on vertical economies. In some cases, it may just be tourism, others agriculture. And we do have we do experience capacity issues to deliver on many of the international mandates, including the energy transition. Most importantly, common to SIDS is also our vulnerabilities, whether it be to global oil prices, to natural hazards. We stand on the front line despite contributing negligibly to greenhouse gases, etc. Now, depending on each region, there will be slight nuances. So, for example, in the Pacific, there's still challenges with energy access and reliability of grid infrastructure. So you'll see there may be scheduled load shedding for 4 hours a day for weeks on end, you know. In the Caribbean, we may have issues with aging infrastructure, but our access is quite high. And reliability is also quite high, although some may beg to differ. Caribbean SIDS are also classified as highly developed. So this may also impact our access to some financing facilities and financing mechanisms. And in all 3 regions, we have challenges attracting private investment for all the reasons described above. So when we're looking at the energy transition, there's a gamut of challenges, but my colleagues on this panel, we are doing and we are implementing programs. So for example, there are project proposal preparation facilities by the CCRI and CCSA. We do have our forums for financing. We do provide training and technical assistance. So we are striving and working together to be able to overcome these challenges. So and the fact that there's installations in Jamaica, across the Caribbean, Trinidad, etc., we continue to prevail despite all of these challenges. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing Ricardo. Ricardo, do you want to add to this question?
Certainly. Thank you, Tony. From a perspective that includes negotiating at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change level, as well as working at the national level in building resilience, we really struggle in getting across to others how they see at our resolution, because we're so small Oftentimes, people cannot even imagine us as an independent state being able to operate, but we have to do so in the world in which we are, because we also find ourselves directly on the front lines of the climate crisis that we have not caused, and we suffer more than our fair share relative to the loss and damage that we are seeing as a result of the failure of the global community to mitigate emissions and reduce the impacts of the global warming and climate change. Because of our small market size and limited access to goods and services, it makes the transition even more difficult. And this is exacerbated by the supply chain issues that we're suffering, affecting access to everything from electric vehicles to panels and all other equipment that needs to be imported.
Thank you. I'm going to go from challenges and be a little bit more optimistic and I want to look at the biggest opportunities. What are the biggest opportunities that exist with the energy transition? Raquel, you spoke earlier about hydrogen. And I wanted you to expand on that a little bit, because that is indeed an area within the energy transition that a lot of people, particularly persons who are interested in climate, speak of quite often.
You know, so hydrogen is being framed as the fuel of the future, right? And what we have to realize is that we can't just continue to be the world's customers and the tourism destination. We also have to take part. Trillions of dollars will be spent on this new economy that's being created that climate action requires us to transition to. And so we need to also create solutions that can be purchased in this new economy. Hydrogen is a huge opportunity. It's what people are forecasting for planes and for ships and for transportation, like cars as well, but mostly, you know, for those sort of large scale transportation modalities. And the fantastic thing is we have tourism, so it means that cruise ships are coming, we're a transshipment point, you know, airlines are coming. So we have the relationships that we need to be able to capitalize on this opportunity. But in order to capitalize on this opportunity, we need to cooperate and we need to collaborate. Because as Ricardo was saying, because we are small, we lack the economies of scale individually to really be a major player on this global hydrogen market. So there are many things that we need to be doing, and we need to be doing quickly in order to capitalize on that opportunity.
How long ago did people realize that this entire hydrogen energy situation is really something that can be capitalized upon? I'll go to you, Gary, but I just wanted to ask Raquel this. How long has this been a serious discussion?
You know, it's been a serious discussion for a while, but the funny thing is that, you know, when you think about the number of projects that have been announced just in the last year, there have been over 300 projects that have been announced. So it means that the momentum is growing and people are starting to double down on hydrogen as a fuel of the future. We talk about solar, for example, like it's something new. Solar was discovered in the 1800s. So many of the things that we need to do aren't new. We just now need to commit. And we need to transition, and we need to do that quickly.
Gary, your thoughts?
All right, so the opportunities are huge. I think one of the things that I would want a little science background. The first law of thermodynamics speaks about energy. It says energy cannot be created nor destroyed, but converted from one form to the other. So to Raquel's point, every energy form that we have had has been around for years. We have only started to accelerate because of the climate crisis. Now, hydrogen has multiple uses. And as you know, hydrogen is one of the most abundant elements in the world today. All right, so water is a source of hydrogen. And that's where you get most of the hydrogen based on the technologies that are considering now. So they split water particles. The water is H2O, so you're moving hydrogen and oxygen by applying electricity. Once you get the hydrogen can be used in cars, as Raquel said, all type of transportation really, pharmaceutical, steel production, heating, cooling, you name it. It is huge. And the thing for us as a region is that we have abundance of the ability to make what we call green hydrogen. So you have different forms of hydrogen. You have green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, gray hydrogen. Green hydrogen, as you started off the conversation, is using renewable energy to generate and produce green hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is really using something like methane. Remove the hydrogen from the methane, and then you sequestrate or capture the carbon and put it somewhere safe. But we have offshore wind, vast, more than what we can use. Geothermal, hydro, solar, wind, to name a few. And it's just really for us, as Raquel said, to commit. But more importantly, for us to commit, we have to trust each other. So when Ricardo mentioned our sovereignty, it's one thing, but we have to really come together as a region. I know we do that at the climate meeting, but we don't do that on the energy front. And we need to do that at the energy front because it's going to be critical for us. Remember, we have 19.3 persons in this Caribbean region. Haiti represents 11.7 million. Haiti only has 35% electricity available to people. So this gives you the order of magnitude we are talking about in terms of poverty in the region, right? So we have an ability for like 90 million to come together to do a groundswell and drive the transition that we so require in this crisis.
Thank you so much, Gary. Recently, I was talking to a tourist, and she was looking out because we had some beautiful days here in Barbados. Ricardo would know. Sorry for those who are not here. And she literally said about the Caribbean, look at all of this energy that we're wasting. She pointed to the sunlight. I would like to ask you, what have been the best in class examples where the Caribbean has excelled in the energy transition? Do you still feel as if we are wasting a lot of energy? What are those examples that I could have retorted and said to her, actually, no, we have X, Y, Z. Can you answer these? I'll start with Raquel.
Sure. So the funny thing is, the earth can be powered. All of our energy needs can be taken up on solar alone. But the fact is, in the Caribbean, we have about 29 gigawatts worth of geothermal potential. That's huge. That's huge. That's huge. That's many, many times more than we would need to power the region. So we could put some of that to good use for export, for example. But when you think about the Caribbean, and these are the stories that aren't told, Barbados and your solar water heaters, it might seem very normal to you, but Barbados is an absolute pioneer in solar water heating and with very deep penetration. Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire have a magnificent energy mix. They're using wind, they're using hydro, they're using solar, they're using waste to energy. And so they are really excellent at showing what an ideal energy mix could look like. Jamaica has done magnificent things in terms of opening up its market and then showing how in opening up that market, you get private developers to come in and clamor for the projects that are available. They're also looking at their first floating solar project. You have countries like Bermuda, and Minister Roban, the Deputy Premier of Bermuda, is watching. They are water independent, and that is something that all of us can learn from because each individual home produces its own water through a very innovative system that they've developed in each household. Costa Rica, one of very few countries, one of only 7 countries on the planet that runs on renewable energy completely. So we have tons of examples of excellence, even in private sector. Sandals is doing some wonderful things in terms of removing plastic from its operations. Recycling Partners of Jamaica, a private sector group came together to collect plastic. Where there's Unicomer, that's one of the largest power producers, independent power producers in the region, and they're doing it just for their operations. So we have wonderful examples of absolute excellence across the region, but we need to tap into, one, getting our stories told, and two, as Gary has reiterated, learning from each other. We have to trust each other and learn the lessons. None of us are doing everything 100% right, but there are absolute centers of excellence across the region, and once we collaborate, we have the ability to tap into those centers of excellence.
Raquel, I wish I had you with me earlier when I was talking to the tourists. I would have rattled that off extremely impressively, just like how you did. I want to ask Gary first and then Ricardo. Raquel spoke about the solar power, but this year was the first time I heard about hydrogen, and I'm sure that's the case with most Caribbean citizens. If we had focused on a lot of these opportunities 20 years ago, what would the Caribbean look like? I will ask Gary first, and then I'll ask Ricardo.
All right, I'm going to keep this one very simple and short for you, Tony. So, reliability, would have had more reliable power. Affordable power, it would be more affordable. Available power, it would be more available. And what we have seen is our economies would have actually grown beyond where it is today. And those are the things that I believe if we had started 20 years ago, would have been, an innovation would have come into play because we'll have done so much. And as Raquel mentioned about lessons learned, would have gained so much knowledge that our youngsters would have actually created new technologies for us to even accelerate further our energy transition.
We're seeing a lot of people investing in climate tech companies, and that seems to be the area that's growing, particularly in things like venture capital, etc. So I must agree with you, Gary, even though I don't have an opinion on this show. Ricardo.
Thank you, Tony. I would add as well to what Gary said that we would be much more independent, not just in terms of power, but also with respect to foreign exchange, because we have a great deal of foreign exchange leaving the region every year to be able to pay for our ability to generate electricity and to run our vehicles through the use of fossil fuels. But to put a bit more of a pessimistic spin on things, the other reality is that we would still be on the front lines of the climate crisis. And this is an unfortunate reality because we are not the ones who have created the problem by failing to mitigate, but we are the ones who are on the front lines of a climate crisis, meaning that every single time there is a storm or a hurricane that develops in this region during the hurricane season, we are staring down the barrel of a gun with the reality that we could lose more than 100% of our GDP in less than 5 hours, as has been the case for a number of the countries across the region to date. So that is the realistic view that we also need to have from on the front line.
And from what you're saying, Ricardo, those terms like climate injustice and climate reparations, those terms come out of that conversation that you've just presented?
Indeed,
okay.
Indeed, because we are really the accelerated mirrors of the world. So if you want to see what happens when we fail to act, look at the countries of the SIDS who are on the front lines of the climate crisis and are suffering inordinately more than others, but we just paint the picture of where everybody is heading.
I have a question for Enika, speaking about SIDS, but before you do that, I have a quick question. Gary, please do not be offended. I'm asking you this question on the spot, but I know people are going to ask. You said that the bills, the energy bills, would be cheaper. Would you think that...
Affordable.
More affordable. Sorry. Would be more affordable.
Big difference.
Do you think that if I have a bill of X amount of money, would it have been cut by half, a quarter? What's the gauge on that?
All right, so that is why I use the word affordable, because our economies will have been doing better. So your disposable income would allow you to afford more.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Okay, so not half or a quarter. You can't put anything on it, but definitely less than what it is now.
No, because what is important to understand, and as I think Ricardo and Raquel mentioned this, is because we import fuel at this juncture, right? What you find happening is that even if we reduce that importation, we don't have control over that pricing. So we could actually maintain our consumption and our price still goes up. So we have no control over that. But what we do have a control of is actually creating more employment, more development, if we are able to use more innovation to replace that imported oil with that 20-year what we are saying when we're coming into the future, would have been able to do that because our economies will be growing.
Okay, thank you so much. Annika, I wanted to ask you.
No, Tony, I just wanted to jump in and
Sure.
say, you know, I'm not trying to be controversial, but many Caribbean countries are paying 30, 40, 37, 20 something cents per kilowatt hour for electricity. We are producing solar at 11 cents as an example. You can get solar down to 8 or 9 cents. So while I'm not suggesting that your bill would have been a quarter of what it would be, the reality is that if we had transitioned to renewables sooner, we would absolutely be facing lower energy bills. And as Gary said, we would be facing energy bills that we are controlling the components of. But now we are so vested in this old infrastructure that the cost of transitioning is high, but the cost per kilowatt hour once we transition is quite low, and the long-term costs are low. So we have to start taking longer-term decisions versus focusing only on what we can do right now.
We have to go to a break. We'll be right back. As soon as we get back from the break, I'll talk to you, Annika. Ladies and gentlemen, please do not touch your remote controls. This is a fascinating conversation which affects all of us. We'll be right back.
CEF is for me and you. Beyond COVID, CEF is for me and you. Caribbean Economic Forum move.
Come with us to Lime Tree Lane, where life is sometimes sour, but sometimes sweet.
Oh, I was in the bar yesterday, trying to convert over 2 man. And my hand make mistake and bungs down them drinks. And the other one said to me, why if you right enough and you cut it off, boss? And same time, the two of them just hold me down and cut the hand.
Have a laugh and settle into Lime Tree Lane. Join us Mondays to Fridays at 7 a.m.
And when they done their feet on you, you understand me? No wonder the boy was having a high. No, come back here. Where do you think you're going?
Let me go check in bed.
Only on PBCJ, the People's Station.
Yes, walk right over there and drop it in the bin. Reuse that wastewater from your kitchen for the garden. Get your hands dirty and plant a tree. Farmers, hold off on the pesticides, especially near our rivers. Do your part to protect our watersheds so we can preserve the source of our drinking water. Every act to protect our watersheds counts. Start now.
We remain resilient in our fight against known and unknown threats to our country. We are never daunted.
We are committed to continuously deliver effective and efficient service when we save lives and protect property.
And we continue to reassure with courtesy, integrity, and respect for the rights of all.
We are building
forward together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go straight back. Annika, my question for you is, what are some of the simple actions that the average Caribbean citizen can undertake to help with the energy transition? Do I eat more, for me, for example, do I eat more beef or do I eat less beef? Do I drink more oat milk rather than almond milk, which is bad for the environment? Do I ride to work on a bicycle in the rain rather than drive my car? What can we do to help with the energy transition?
Thanks, Tony. I may divide the room a bit, but I actually just wanted to continue that conversation that was having a bit that you were having previously. One of the things, besides the usual reflex, where we say, okay, it can be behavioral and energy conservation, one of the things is I'd like the average citizen or person to divest the term affordable with cheap.
Okay.
Okay.
Noted.
So, yes, because Gary said affordable and your reflex was cheap.
I was hoping
And
it was cheaper.
and if we think about it as any consumer product, an appliance that you buy for your house, because we would say, oh no, we rather this brand because it's more reliable, it's it's more it's new, etc. So if we're looking for energy sources and energy supplies, and we want a grid that is modern, automated, fancy, it's reliable, there's no outages, it's resilient, especially in the face of the hazards that SIDS face, we need to start thinking, shifting our thinking that in order to get all of these things, we need to think in terms of affordability versus cheapness. And I'll pause there.
Thank you. So just to expand on that a little bit more, any other tips in terms of?
Of course, they're the low-hanging fruit in terms of energy conservation, to turning off lights if you're not using it, changing from CFL or incandescents, which I believe are still in use, to LED lighting, etc. So there are things that persons can do to try to maintain our household costs. However, again, Gary mentioned earlier that we cannot control. The average citizen has no control over electricity costs, especially as much of the investment it stems from outside of our region. So in order to maintain or to control our costs, we can make some simple behavioral changes, which can of course impact our lives. But in terms of a mental shift from cheap to affordability, I'll also propose that as well.
Thank you so much. A question for you, Gary. I see you raising your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, because this is what Anika said about energy conservation. This is very important for this conversation. We have what we call, and I always bring science back to it, you have what you call the energy pyramid. You know what a pyramid looks like, that triangle, yes, right? At the bottom of that pyramid is energy conservation. The first and foremost thing that any citizen should be doing is energy conservation. Turn the lights off, check if your faucets are leaking. Make sure you don't have any leaking. And I know human beings will like convenience, but we have to pay more attention to that convenience that has been given to us. The second part of that triangle is energy efficiency that Anika mentioned. So now you start looking at what type of appliances that you can now get to be more efficient. So you're changing the lights, you get a refrigerator that's an inverter type. If you had an AC, you change out that AC to an inverter type AC. Then, after you have done all of that, renewable energy comes into play. That's the last thing we should consider. Not the first, the last thing we should consider. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I will take that into consideration, and I will be turning off any light that is in a room that I am not in. Up next, we have one of our moderators, and that is Mrs. Renice Medford. Renice.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, Renice. The floor is yours.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. You know, we have so many success stories in the Caribbean with renewable energy, but I know there's still room for growth. And ideally, it's about people, and we need to have grassroots conversations with people and bring them along on the journey, those who are not really familiar with the space. So my question to Ricardo is, what else is being done by policymakers to engage the average person on the street about all the policies and initiatives being implemented, how they will be of benefit to them directly, and the role that they can play in helping us to transition to green energy? Thank you.
Thank you, Renice.
Good night, Renice, and thank you for the question. I think that as you look across the region, you're seeing more and more work being done on the development of energy policies, as well as IRRPs, as Gary mentioned earlier. And key in what we're doing in that sphere is having the conversations with people that we need to have, so that we explain to them what the issues are, what they can do, and what the overall goal and objective is under the policy. And certainly in the Barbadian sphere, what we're seeking to do is to have that overall national level where we have all of those policies linked, be they the physical development plan, the Barbados economic recovery and transformation, be it the marine spatial plan that we're currently working on, our nationally determined contributions. All of those, you would have had significant input from stakeholders into the overall process, and they also then feed into the sectoral policies, including the energy mix. And so it has to be a conversation that includes all people because we have to move forward together and to make that just transition as we go about things.
Any other panelists wanted to jump in? Raquel, I see you smiling. Okay.
All right, I can jump in. So go ahead, Raquel. Go ahead.
No, I was really just thinking about what two things. What Anika was saying about cheap versus affordable, and I'm probably one of the older panelists. I'm definitely older than Anika. I remember the first microwave in our house, right? And it was incredibly expensive because it was new technology. Now, whenever you're introducing something new and you haven't scale with it, it's going to be more expensive. But I actually don't think that's the case. And when she said that her comment would divide the room, I'm like, definitely for me, because I think the reality of the situation is once we adopt renewables, we have the ability to reduce the cost of energy in the region. That's just, the math shows that once we overcome the initial cost of the transition, the cost per kilowatt hour will be less, right? And when it comes to energy conservation, I think the first thing that people just need to do is to care. If what you care about is cheaper electric bills, then unplug the stuff that you're not using. Don't plug in stuff if you're not using it. Don't leave electrical outlets just plugged in with stuff. There's so many little things. But the first thing, if you care about reducing the cost of your energy bills, then start doing your research, finding the information. We have a lot of information on our socials at Caribbean Accelerator. You can go to caribbeanaccelerator.org and you'll find all of our socials there. But there's a lot of things that people can do. But I also believe that we need to sell the dream. And the reality is that when we transition to renewables in the region, it will reduce the cost because we will be using what the Prime Minister of Barbados says, our patrimony. Our renewable energy is ours. It's not something we have to buy from somebody else.
And on that note of course, I have a question, but before I get to that question, I'm going to go to our second intervener, and her name is Mrs. Ashley Lashley.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Tony. My question tonight is directed at Anika. And listening to the conversation this evening, I'm so desirous to hear your answer, especially as a young person and youth being considered as one of the most vulnerable groups to the climate crisis. And I was very much surprised this evening not to hear youth engagement mentioned throughout the dialogue. So, Anika, my question to you, as we know, transitioning to green energy can lead to job creation. What efforts are being made to provide training and employment opportunities for young people within the renewable energy sector?
Thank you, Mrs. Lashley, sorry, for your question. Throughout the region, throughout the global SIDS, there are opportunities for training and development. There are apprenticeship programs being made available at community colleges. Firstly, to start off with, the energy transition, we understand requires jobs at all levels, at the policy level and at the technical level as well. So we do have a gamut of space available, and the point is to ensure that we fill those spaces with qualified persons. So with the ecosystem of the energy transition, when we look at the provision of jobs, the involvement of youth, we undertake at the policy level a whole of society approach. At a strategy level, also a whole of society approach. As Raquel mentioned, I think there needs to be a level of effort and a level of care. There are facilities available, whether it be at the university level. The UE offers degree programs, courses, etc. If you're looking at undertaking advanced degrees, there are technical diplomas available, etc. So if, and as Raquel also said, if you do a bit of research, there are opportunities made available, because what we do need are hands on the ground to be able to contribute to this energy transition.
Thank you so much, Enika. Now, one of the aims of the Caribbean Economic Forum is to ensure that the average viewer walks away after our program with some context, that they can give an opinion or give a perspective about the energy transition or whatever topic is being discussed. So I have to ask, we spoke about costs earlier. How costly, and I'm not saying expensive, how costly will the successful energy transition be? Will it be in the tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions? I'm very curious about this, and I know that some of our viewers would be as well.
Let's go first. Billions. Let me start there.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not going to be millions. It's going to be in the B's. It's going to be billions.
And hundreds of billions as well.
For the region?
For the region.
Definitely.
For the region, definitely. So one of the things that we have to understand is, as you'll hear the panelists, when you talk about resilience, resilience comes with what we call adaptation. For you to adapt to what Ricardo mentioned with this crisis that we are in, I mean, we are suffering from it. You have seen it, the Dorian, the Thomas, Maria, Irma, Ivan. For you to build adaptation into your systems is going to cost serious money. So think about a Dominica that is very mountainous. And Dominica is considering putting underground cables through mountains. Now, underground cables within the engineering design are actually more expensive than overhead cables, right? Based on engineering design principles. So just creating caverns, going underground, building protection for that, and then going through a mountain, that alone is going to cost serious money. We think about geothermal in some of these countries, especially in the OECS countries. The development work just to get a geothermal project started, and you will have heard a number of countries undertaking this. You're talking about exploratory drill. And you remember, renewable energy is very site-specific. You cannot move it. It's only where the energy is, that's where it is. You can't move it anywhere else. When you start about exploratory drilling, so you have to do exploratory drilling, test the drill, and then you have to reach a production well. Then you have to do what they call a reinjection well. So you have to do all that work. That could take years. Then now you put in your power plant, and then you have to commission it and test it. All of that takes money. As a matter of fact, a number of development partners have played a part, I guess within the COP negotiations, have played a part to de-risk those projects because they are so expensive for any one country to undertake by themselves. If you think about offshore wind, so you look at Barbados, think about going out into the ocean and putting up a turbine that is almost 180 meters high, right? And then putting blades on that, and then anchoring that into the seabed or using some anchoring system of some sort to keep it there. I mean, think about what that would take. You'll have to get big cranes. Some of them use helicopters. Just to put those things in place is going to cost serious money. However, I know you're going to get into regional integration, and that is why it's going to be very important for that 19 million people to come together with their leadership to make the transition possible. Because not 250,000 Barbados, not 2.8 million in Jamaica, not 1.2 million in Trinidad, 19 million. And the reason for that is that we are not large. We are small in size, and we have to find a way to bridge that gap to make sure that we build the skills. So to Ms. Lashley's questions, to build the skills within. So right now, we're supposed to start training people for offshore wind technicians. We have been doing training for geothermal. We have done a lot of solar training. We have not done a lot of wind training for technicians to go on with turbines, so we need to do more of that. Hydros, we haven't done a lot. We have done some, but we need to do more because there's a lot of hydro potential. And once we start building that capacity, we are going to prepare ourselves for the transition, because we can be a part, as Raquel mentioned, solar production, solar PV production. We can help to do that as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gary. I have a question for Ricardo. How is the energy transition going to be financed? And should governments and national pension funds focus their long-term investments on the energy transition and renewable energy?
Well, certainly once you're talking about the financing, you're talking in the realm globally of trillions of dollars a year. And if you're to make that happen, you need to have the sort of program in place that addresses the global financial mechanism that allows us to address that. And I can speak a little bit on that later relative to the Bridgetown initiative, etc. But with respect to the question about governments and national pension funds and financing that sort of thing, it's a difficult question to say that you should say yes or no for a country or a pension fund, given that this is directly related to the risk involved from their evaluation, and you need to have that full feasibility study and evaluation done. You have to look at the level of development and the priorities of the country. It is certainly true that the green energy options are growing cheaper, and that even at this stage, as Raquel has said repeatedly, they're more cost effective than many of the traditional, if not all of the traditional solutions. But we also have to address other things internally before you call on persons to make those investments. You need to ensure that you have your feed-in tariffs in place. You have to ensure that you have the grid capacity, either with respect to the feeder lines that will be needed to move that power, or to have the storage so that you can have that successful transition. So you have to take those key matters into account. And of course, the private financing and blended financing opportunities are going to be critical as we move these discussions forward. But just to give you an example, if you're looking at a mitigation-related project for energy generation, you're going to have to be in a position where you can prove the feasibility of your project going forward. And that feasibility study needs to have the financing for that, for the environmental impact assessment that you will need to do, for the moving it through the planning process. Because it is only when you have that approval that you have a project that is available for you to be able to put out for financing. So you have to be able to finance that first bit, then to attract the private financing to be able to have an effective project that will attract private sector.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. Raquel, this is a stock-taking year as it relates to a lot of the goals and commitments to reducing greenhouse gases and measuring success with green energy. What assessments will be undertaken to determine where we are now versus where we ought to be in the coming months?
So within the region, and we are working on a climate smart map and in collaboration with PwC and Templeton Foundation. And it is to identify just that. Where are we against the objectives that we've set? And what you'll find is that, I think, and what the global stocktake sadly will reveal, is that we are far behind where we need to be. And it wouldn't be so bad if where we've committed to be would take us where we need to go. The fact is, where we've committed to be is not going to take us where we need to go, and we're not even reaching that. So it is going to be a bit of a come to Jesus, where everyone's going to have to decide, okay, what does this really mean that we should do? And just one thing on the cost of this transition. We treat the cost of the transition as though it is burning money. It isn't. That is economic activity. What we need to make sure is that as much of that money that needs to be spent is spent within the region on solutions that we create. So this is calling all entrepreneurs and solution providers. We may not be able to create big wind turbines, but there are components of the solution set that we need, that we can create, and we need to make sure that we are fixated on how do we participate in this new economy.
Thank you so much, Raquel. Ricardo, I wanted to ask you about the Bridgetown initiative. We hear so much about it. I was actually watching a TED Talk that your colleague, Mr. Avinash Prasad, it had over 500,000 views. So what is the Bridgetown initiative, and what are the plans to advance the initiative and its many goals?
Thank you, Tony. If I could just take a step back, really, and look at the question that Raquel was just speaking on relative to the global stocktake. The reality is that we are at almost 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and we are hurtling towards 2.7. We know that most of the nationally determined contributions fall woefully short of what is required. Yet we continue to get requests and indeed in some instances demands from developed countries, calling on developing countries to provide more information, to do more adaptation, to bear more of the brunt of the climate crisis, while they have failed to take responsibility, including responsibility relative to the current loss and damage, or indeed show any real intent to mitigate. We're asking questions on the global stocktake which we already know the answers to. What we need is action. And that is where the Bridgetown Initiative is challenging globally. The Bridgetown Initiative is a global approach to the restructuring of the global financial mechanism, including the climate finance mechanism, to meaningfully redraw the global financial system to better respond to climate and indeed the development crisis. The initiative began from informal discussions initially hosted by Prime Minister Motley in Bridgetown, Barbados, and thus the name. It looks at providing immediate liquidity support to UN member states, at restoring debt sustainability, at mobilizing private sector investment in the tune of over $1.5 trillion a year for the green and just transformation, increasing official sector development lending for SDGs to $500 billion a year, ensuring that the multilateral trading system supports the green and just transition that we have spent the night talking about, and the reforming of the governance and the operations of the international finance institutions. This approach would allow us to move towards the green transition and to finance such a move while ensuring a more fair and equitable job management and our adaptation to the climate crisis, allowing us to build more resilient communities, societies, and countries. The response has been very positive to date, but we need to continue to keep that drive so that we do not settle for pursuing the status quo that does not move us forward, but to change the finance perspective to that which is for a modern day, because most of the countries that exist now, and indeed none of the countries of CARICOM, none of us existed when those financial mechanisms came into place. And that is why Bridgetown is critical to changing the dynamic.
These financial mechanisms would have come in the 70s, 80s, 20s.
You're talking about the Bretton Woods institutions, ma'am,
Okay.
which came about really and truly to assist Europe to rebuild after the Second World War. And so you're dealing with a system that was put in place to address a circumstance that is not the circumstance that obtains today.
Thank you so much for informing us about that. And I know that you will do very well with the Bridgetown initiative, Ricardo. You've done a lot thus far, and I know you will continue to do extremely well. This is a topic which affects us all, and if you care about your future, you would not touch or change the channel. We'll be right back.
Keep that smile on their faces and preserve their innocence. Cherish the moments you have with them and create the best memories. Let's inspire our children to dream big and work hard to achieve all they aspire to be. Take the time to listen to our children and really hear their side of the story. Our children deserve love and the right to access their basic needs. Do your part and protect our children.
Here is a special parenting message brought to you by the National Family Planning Board, 5 Sylvan Avenue, Kingston 5.
Every father should remember that one day his son will follow his example instead of his advice.
That was a special parenting message brought to you by the National Family Planning Board, 5 Sylvan Avenue, Kingston 5.
Get involved to fight climate change. Come make we engage to fight climate change. Get involved. Too much carbon dioxide a release a contribute to climate change. Severe weather and strong hurricanes. Out the season rainfall and the place turn river like jokes. And it make the temperature hotter. We have to use up the sun, the wind and rivers to get cheaper and better energy. Plant more trees, preserve the forest, practice proper disposal of garbage. European Union and Jamaica are partnering for a sustainable future.
For staying with us, this is the latest edition of the Caribbean Economic Forum. Our discussion tonight, for those now joining, centers around energy, transition, and green energy. Our guests, right now, we have many different luminaries from across the region. But before I answer any more questions, I want to introduce our social media moderator, Dr. Anki Scott Joseph.
Good evening, Tony. Good evening, panelists. Good evening to the viewers. The energy transition process comprises phases that build on each other. They require improved systems and extensive investment in technology. It is vital that we note that a sustainable approach is needed for us to transition safely. Hence, we need to consider 5 factors: profitability, efficiency, affordability, keeping providers committed and accountable. Therefore, Dr. Gary, will the technology be cheap enough to make it affordable to transition? More specifically, can consumers be guaranteed a more inexpensive service where efficiency and reliability will not be compromised? How would we be able to keep providers committed and accountable?
Thank you very much for that question. So there are a couple of things that will need to happen. All right, so we always say there are a couple of things that consumers want, and we call it the real principle. It's real for consumers: reliability, environmental consideration, affordability, availability, and leadership. The leadership is going to be very critical to achieve what you have just mentioned. Our ability to create a groundswell in terms of building a regional integration platform is going to be critical for that affordability to become practical for our consumers. What I can say is that we all have a role to play. Consumers can become what we call prosumers, so they can also produce electricity to be a part of the energy system. The technology will reduce in costs because, as you know, once the technology matures and it has a greater demand, then the costs will go down. We have seen that with solar PV. We have seen that with wind technology. We are seeing that now in batteries and lithium-ion batteries, and batteries came around, maybe 10, 15 years ago. We have seen the cost trending down. One of the things that we are grappling with now is how we recycle, reuse, and repurpose the batteries as they get to their useful life. So some of the things that we have to consider is, as you have mentioned earlier, and Tony had mentioned in terms of the funds, in terms of pension funds, we should engage the stock exchange. We should create a market for energy in a stock market form. Energy efficiency can play a critical role in that energy ecosystem. One of the things that we are working on with utilities across the region is what we call an integrated utility service model. What that does, that is an operation that happens behind your meter. So a utility will come into your home and do what we call an energy audit. They will assess all your energy needs and see if you are being conservative and if you are being efficient. If you are being conservative, fine. If you are not being efficient because of your equipment, they will change them out for you at no cost to you initially. And what that would do is that if they change out your fridge or they change your AC, they will then get back their return on their investment on your bill over time through what we call an on-billing mechanism. So you will have the energy savings, and then you will share some of the savings with them for them to recover their costs. That is a mechanism for the consumer to get an affordable energy in their household. And that could also happen at the commercial level. Now, what could happen is that financial institutions and investors could play a role to create a fund to support that initiative because it's going to be recovered over time through this mechanism. So that is one of the things that could happen very quickly. And we are trying to get that done now in a number of countries, either through the regulatory regime of that country or unregulated, meaning that the utility could set up a special purpose vehicle to get this done in record time. And what that also does, it also introduces renewable energy. So what we call distributed energy resources. So those energy resources will be put on your household or on your buildings of your business place, and you will become part of the ecosystem. So some supply will go into your home to supply your new energy efficient mechanism, and some would go to the grid to support the other parts of the grid that need support. So what will happen is that the system will now become a very integrated system, both on the distributed side and on the transmission side. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gary. I have a question about young people, and Ashley spoke about that. How are today's students being prepared for the energy transition and the roles that they may have to take on in the decades to come as they take over the baton from persons like yourselves? Anika?
Sure. Well, thanks again for that question, Tony. As mentioned previously, there are courses, there are training programs, there are developmental programs that are in existence, not only in the region, but internationally, which are available to students, to young people. There are even internship programs. So IRENA has an internship program. I'm sure the CDB, they would have internship programs. So many of our institutions also have incorporated these learning and developmental programs in order to usher in the next generation of thought leaders and implementers. These resources are available online or in person because, for example, there's the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute in Barbados, there's the UE in Jamaica, in Trinidad, etc. And of course, our colleagues who's also part of the panel, they can also speak more to their programs and outreach as it relates to youth.
Thank you so much. I wanted to point us in the direction of the regulatory frameworks across the region. And how advanced are these regulatory frameworks across the region for transitioning to green energy? Ricardo.
It varies widely.
Raquel.
It varies. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Go ahead,
go ahead,
Ricardo. Go ahead, Ricardo.
Go ahead, Raquel. By all means,
I was
go
trying
ahead.
to keep both Ricardo and Gary out of trouble because because we're not a government institution. I can speak my mind.
Go ahead.
So it varies. It varies widely in some instances, and it requires greater collaboration. Because in some countries, and I'm not going to name names on this one, but in some countries, the regulatory framework is making a lot of progress and seeking to meet the moment. In other countries, it is very far behind. So, Ricardo was talking about things like, do you have a feed-in tariff? SECRE does a lot of phenomenal work on IRPs. Not all countries have up-to-date IRPs. Some countries don't even have them. So we need to make sure that we have the integrated resource and resilience plans in place. We need to make sure that we're looking at the policy frameworks that support the kind of energy marketplaces that we want. But we also need to not need to reinvent the wheel. Right? I appreciate that there's some countries that have different types of natural resources and they want their policy framework to be specific to the resources that they have. But at the end of the day, if one country has a policy framework that works and you're seeing their market being able to attract investment for energy projects, and you're seeing their citizens being able to participate, and I appreciate that countries are different sizes, but I don't feel like there is sufficient collaboration across countries on the regulatory framework. And I think if we were collaborating better, we would be far more advanced.
I will get to that collaboration and regional integration question, but I have to ask, what are traditional energy companies doing to transition to energy, green energy? We see what's happening with a lot of the European energy companies transitioning to green energy. What stages are we at with our local, and when I say local, I mean regional, energy companies? Do they feel any pressure to transition? Where are we at with that? I see Raquel smiling again. But Gary, go ahead.
And the question you just asked relates to the question you asked before, the regulation. There is a distrust across the region by country. So I'll give you an example. The consumer don't trust the utility don't trust the regulator doesn't trust the utility, the government doesn't trust the utility. And that is just a mayhem. So what you find happening is that utilities are saying we are ready for the transition. We want to raise it, but we want to ensure that the rules are clear. The rules are within the regulatory structure. So they want to ensure the rules are clear and they want to make sure that they can participate. So when they say open up the market, they're saying, fine, open the market, but we need to participate and we have something to say as well. And what you find happening is that there's some difference in views, and this is part of the challenges that we are facing. And we need to harmonize. I believe a small island state, we need to harmonize our regulation, but sometimes regulations seem to give countries or governments that they don't have control, because a regulator is a creature of statute. And if they write the statute a particular way, the government might feel they have no control, and then they would have to change it, or they have no regulations at all because they would have no control. And those are some of the challenges we're facing today.
Thank you. If no one else,
these utilities are making money doing business as usual, and that's part of the challenge. If you're making money doing things exactly the way that you're doing it, and you're not required to change your business model, then your comfort zone is to just continue operating the way you've been operating. So we also need to create an incentive for them to want to change their business model.
Thank you, Raquel. How important is regional integration to the energy transition? This is a question for all of you, but I will start with Enika.
Oh, I thought you'd have started with Gary because he's chomping at the bit to get to that one.
Well, Gary, you take the floor.
I've said it. Enika, you continue. I've said my piece on that already. That is my passion. That is my passion. So I need to say
no. I will end with you, Gary. I will end with you. I will go as the viewers are seeing Enika, Ricardo, Raquel, and then I'll end with you.
Okay. Well, Irina, we work not only at the country level, but also at the regional and international level. And especially with SIDS, working at the regional level is quite important. There's a Jamaican term, we little, but we talawa,
Yeah.
So they're number one, there's strength in numbers. Raquel mentioned the need to showcase what we're doing. There's so many advancements happening in the region that we don't know about. Sabre, Aruba, Curacao, they live geographically in our region, but we don't hear much about the advancements. And in that showcasing, there's opportunity for knowledge and exchange. What worked well, what didn't work. We share some common challenges and vulnerabilities. And through working together, we should be able to come up with common solutions that work with us, that work for us, sorry. And also having this collective, again, being a collective, there's strength in numbers, but also to a point that was made in the beginning, we also need to be able to influence at the international and the global stage, that we are sovereign states, that we do have these challenges, and that whatever we experience now is what will be experienced in future by the so-called developed nations. So I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you very much, Tony. And I think we know well where Raquel and Gary sit on this one, and I will leave most of the stage to them. Really, we need to back up the national commitments that we have made with action, because we need to have those individual actions so that we can make that collective impact. But it is not just in the area of the work that we need to do on the energy transition, but also to ensure that our voice is heard as sovereign states as well as members of AOSIS, um, as we do our part in the mitigation fight, and critically make our voices be heard clearly on issues relating to loss and damage, and the need to have an effective and properly resourced fund to tackle the loss and damage issues that we're facing, as well as promote the development of the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, and setting that climate finance goal at a realistic level and not the previous 100 billion that we are still waiting to realize that does not get the job done. So we need to make our voices heard and to show our strength in numbers collectively if we're to move forward.
Thank you, Ricardo. Raquel?
The economies of scale that we're going to create by working together, if we're going to attract major offtake agreements that are going to help us to finance some of these infrastructure investments that we need to make, we need to work together. And by amassing our demand, amassing our power, amassing our collective voice, that is only going to happen if we work together. We can either have all of very little or a small piece of a very, very big global pie, but it requires that we collaborate.
Gary, the
Well,
floor
I'm
is
just going
yours.
to add one. No, just to say that, so, I'm agreeing with everything everybody said, but just to say that we are now engaged in a regional energy integration initiative, decarbonizing to enhance energy security. And that's a publication that we're working on with IDB and the CDB, and we hope to have that out in Energy Month, November 2023. That's a baseline assessment report. We're going to go into a second phase after that. But I think it is important to realize, I'm going to give you a few figures here so that you can understand why economies of scale is important to us. The total generating capacity right now in CARICOM member states is 6,620 megawatts. The total renewable energy capacity installed to date is 680 megawatts. So you can understand how far behind we are at this juncture. So we need to accelerate and scale up. And I believe regional integration is going to give us that opportunity to do that. Thanks.
Thank you. Speaking of numbers, I have another question for you, and it revolves around jobs. Over the next 5 years, how many jobs do you think will need to be created to ensure a successful energy transition?
That's like how long is a piece of string? It depends.
Are we and what type of jobs? What type of jobs do you foresee being created? Climate engineers to kind of look at further innovations with solar panels. What are the kind of jobs that you can see within the next 5 years that people, when they go and they go overseas and they study climate and green energy and energy transition, what are the kind of jobs that are going to come back here and are hopefully going to go in tandem with the tourism industry?
So at the accelerator, I'll tell you, we have a goal of 1.5% new green jobs. And we think that the component of green jobs in the region should be something that's measurable, because right now we're not measuring green jobs, and even if we were, the amount of jobs that we have that are green, it doesn't register on our scale, right? So we need to at least have a measurable component of green jobs. And why is that important? If this new economy and things are going to change, and we have this beautiful, hopeful, opportunistic future where we're living in harmony with nature, we're healthier, we're eating better, we're growing food closer to where we're living, all of the things that need to happen for us to combat climate change are happening. It means that we also need to participate in the economic opportunity that creates, and that means that we have to have the green solutions that creates. The interesting thing when you were asking about young people and the youth and the jobs, young people are interested in this field. We have had interns from all over, from UTT, from UE, doing work for us. There is no end of interest in the area. But what we do need to do is to formalize so that we can create the hundreds of jobs. Because if we're working on it again individually, we're not creating the big community and the mega projects that we need to create to be able to participate in this economy.
Do any of our universities have a climate or energy transition program, to your knowledge?
Definitely, definitely they have. Now, whether they're calling it an energy transition program, but all of them are focused on areas of renewables, the areas of climate action, and some of the specific skills that are required.
Thank you.
I think one of the go ahead,
Gary.
No, you go ahead.
Well, just to add, and also this is not newer. I graduated from UE Jamaica doing renewable energy 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. So the programs do exist at the university, diploma, and technical level.
Gary?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges that we see, because we, as ENICA and CCSS and Macula said, we have an internship program, but what we have seen is there's not enough applied science to what they learn. So they get a lot of theory in the classroom, but I think there needs to be a co-op, and this is something that UWI St. Augustine has started and stopped. And I think we need to get the young scientists into the field for at least a year for them to absorb what is actually taking place in the ground and then go back into the classrooms. So I think we need to create an opportunity for them to apply the theory that they have learned into the field. And I think that is going to be critical for the energy transition.
Thank you so much. I have a question for all of you. I'm going to start with Raquel, then go to Gary, then go to Ricardo, and then end off with Enika, who's all the way in Dubai. Are our ambitions great enough to address the energy transition?
Listen to me, the issue is not ambition at all. At least 10 countries in the region have a goal of 100% renewable energy generation. Over 50% of the countries in the region have a goal that is over 50%. We have Costa Rica and Suriname as the only two countries that have achieved their goal. Suriname, I think their goal was 35 and they're at 42. Costa Rica, their goal was 100 and they reached 100. So the issue isn't ambition. The issue is the ability to close that gap. Of the countries, of the 10 countries that have a goal of 100% renewable energy generation, the highest they've achieved is 25, and the rest are very much lower than that. So the reality is that it isn't the ambition. And even the countries that are below 50%, they are edging up every time you're required to renew your nationally determined contribution. They are changing and increasing their commitment in terms of how much renewable energy they will create. The challenge is, how do we create an affordable path for those countries to be able to transition? Because right now, what we're saying is you have to borrow, and you have to borrow at non-concessional rates in many instances, because a lot of these countries are considered high-income countries, because you're not taking into consideration the vulnerability that they face, the losses that they've incurred, but you're only taking into consideration what their GDP is, which is not a good measure of their ability to afford the transition. So ambition isn't a problem.
Thank you. Gary?
Agreed, ambition is not the problem. So we need to trust each other, trust the process, trust the system. And one of the things that we need to understand is that, as I said in a previous conversation we had, an NREL, a colleague of mine from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Colorado, when I was here some years ago, we came up with this philosophy that Earth is an island, and that small island development states can become what we call a beacon of hope for the world to see. So we should infiltrate, demonstrate, and replicate. Thank you.
Ricardo?
I can only echo what has come from the other panelists so far. Ambition is certainly not the issue, but we do have challenges. We have to overcome the supply chain issues that we're facing so that we can get access to the goods and the services required for us to address our needs relative to power generation and transportation. We need to look at the conditional and the unconditional components within the NDCs. The countries in this region have committed significantly in that respect. But if they're not getting the support for their conditional commitments, then we will not realize our goals. And of course, we have to talk about financing that NDC and financing our development needs. And that is where the Bridgetown initiative has to play a critical role forward globally and regionally for us to realize.
We could talk about this the entire night, but we only have a few more minutes left. So I'm going to ask the final question. I'm going to start with Annika because she was not able to answer the last question. Annika, final thoughts. What are your hopes and dreams as it relates to the Caribbean and the energy transition?
I'll merge
30 seconds.
The last question. I'll merge the last question with this one. We approach everything with fervor and ambition. Ambition is not the issue, but also we need to recognize that renewable energy can be used, should be mainstream throughout society. We need to explore all the interlinkages available to us, whether it be through mitigation, adaptation, and recognize it for its not only as a source of electricity, but for its socioeconomic benefits.
Thank you so much, Annika. Gary?
We need to just trust each other. That's it. We need to just trust each other.
And I'm going to end off with Raquel.
This is an opportunity. If we keep watching this as though it is a problem to solve, we're missing the fact that at the end of the day, this is an opportunity for us. We need to grasp it, and we need to run with it, and we need to make money off of it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gary, Raquel, Ricardo, Annika. It has been a pleasure talking and chatting with you about green energy and the energy transition. I'm sure all of the millions of people who have tuned in are really enjoying and have learned a lot from our conversation. I really want to thank our producer, the Central Bank of Barbados. This is the latest edition of the Caribbean Economic Forum. My name is Tony Thorne. God bless you and good night.
traveling to Jamaica? Submit your customs and immigration declaration online for faster processing.